Go ahead and like this video, and if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to Magical Snail. Now let's get into it. I built that company with my bare hands. 12 years. 12 years of 5 a.m. starts, missed vacations, skipped holidays, and one ulcer that my doctor still brings up every checkup. And my father stood at that podium at the company's 10th anniversary dinner, looked out at a room full of our clients and employees, and said, and I'm going to quote this exactly because I will never forget it, he said, "Everything you see here is the result of this family's vision." Then he put his hand on my brother's shoulder. My brother Derek, who had been with the company for 14 months at that point, and whose biggest contribution was suggesting we repaint the lobby. I told myself it was just my father being my father. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I was good at telling myself things back then. To understand how we got here, I need to take you back a little. Not all the way. I'm not going to put you through my entire childhood. But enough so that what happens later makes sense. Because without the context, it just sounds like bad luck. It wasn't bad luck, it was architecture. Someone built this, brick by brick, for a very long time, and I just wasn't paying attention to who was holding the trowel. My name is not important. Call me a man in his late 40s who spent the better part of 2 decades believing that if you worked hard enough and loved people genuinely enough, they would eventually see you clearly. That's the most honest introduction I can give you. My brother Derek is 4 years younger than me. Growing up, Derek was the one my parents worried about, in the way that parents sometimes mistake worry for devotion. He struggled in school. He had a temper. He quit things. Sports teams, part-time jobs, a semester of community college. Every time Derek quit something, my parents found a way to reframe it. He's just finding himself. He needs more time. He's sensitive. I was not sensitive, apparently. I was just expected to function. My father started a small manufacturing supply business when I was in high school. Nothing glamorous. Industrial parts, shipping contracts, regional clients. When I graduated college, he asked me to come work for him. I want to be honest, I was proud when he asked. I thought it meant something. I went in as operations manager, learned every part of that business from the loading dock to the billing department, and over about 7 years I had quietly taken something that was losing money and turned it into something that was growing year over year. My father was still president. His name was still on the door. I was fine with that. I was building something I thought would one day be mine, in the way that fathers sometimes imply things without ever actually saying them. Derek joined the company when he was 31. He'd been through a bad patch, a failed business venture, some debt I later found out my father had quietly paid off, a relationship that ended badly. My father sat me down and said Derek needed stability, needed to feel like he belonged somewhere. And could I help bring him up to speed? I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my brother. I trained Derek myself. I introduced him to our clients. I vouched for him in rooms where his last name alone wouldn't have been enough. Within a year, my father had given Derek the title of Vice President of Business Development. I was still operations manager. When I asked my father about it, he said Derek needed the title to feel confident. He actually said that. That my brother needed the title to feel confident, as though the function of the company's organizational structure was to manage Derek's self-esteem. I should have walked out that day. I know that now. But I didn't. Because that same year I had married my wife, Sandra, and Sandra and I had just bought a house, and I told myself that things would even out. My father was getting older. The succession conversation would come. I just needed to be patient. Sandra and Derek got along well from the beginning. I noticed it and thought nothing of it. She laughed at his jokes. She remembered his stories. When she and I would go to my parents' house for dinner, she and Derek would end up in separate conversations with my parents while I was usually in the kitchen or the garage, talking shop with my father. It felt normal at the time. Families have their configurations. What I did not know, what I would not know for several more years, was that Derek and Sandra had been spending time together outside of those family dinners. Not immediately, but within about 18 months of Derek joining the company, something had started. I don't know exactly when, and honestly, I've stopped trying to calculate it because the number doesn't change anything. The first real crack happened about 3 years ago. I was pushing my father hard on the succession question. I was 45. He was 72. The business had tripled in revenue since I took over operations. I had a right to ask, and I asked directly, what was the plan? When the time came, How was this going to work? My father got quiet in a way that I didn't immediately recognize, but that I now understand was the quiet of a man who already knew the answer and didn't want to say it out loud. He told me we would discuss it. He told me it was a family matter and we'd handle it as a family. I went home and told Sandra about the conversation. She listened. She said my father was probably just not ready to think about it yet. She said I should give him time. She knew. I'm almost certain she already knew at that point what my father was actually planning. But she sat across from me at our kitchen table and told me to give him time. About 6 months after that conversation, I found out by accident. I wasn't looking for anything. I was helping my father's assistant reorganize some files after she had knee surgery and couldn't come in, and I came across a folder I didn't recognize. Inside was a draft of a revised shareholder agreement. Derek's name was on it as majority owner. Mine was listed as a minority stakeholder with a buyout clause. A buyout clause with a number that was, I'll just say it was not reflective of what I had built. It was a number designed to make me go away, not a number designed to compensate me fairly. I stood in that office for a long time. I remember the sound of the ventilation system. I remember the specific quality of the afternoon light coming through the blinds. I put the folder back exactly where I found it and I went home. I didn't say anything to Sandra that night. I'm not sure why. Part of me needed to think. Part of me, honestly, was hoping I had misread it, that there was context I was missing, that my father had a plan I didn't understand yet. I know how that sounds. Believe me. Over the next few weeks, I watched things differently. I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before, or maybe in a way I had been deliberately stopping myself from doing. And things that I'd explained away over the years stopped being explainable. The way Sandra and Derek texted, not frequently, not obviously, but in that particular rhythm of two people who are used to communicating. The way she sometimes knew things about Derek's schedule that I hadn't told her. A comment she made once about a restaurant that I had never taken her to, but that Derek had mentioned to me once in passing. Small things. The kind of small things that are invisible until they're not. I hired someone to help me understand what I was looking at. I'm not going to get into the details of how or what was found. What I will tell you is that what I had suspected was confirmed, and what I had not suspected, what genuinely blindsided me even then, was how long it had been going on. Not months, years. We're talking about something that started while Sandra and I were still in the first half of our marriage. While I was working 60-hour weeks to build something that everyone around me had apparently already decided wasn't going to be mine. I want to pause here because I think people sometimes expect a man in this situation to describe himself as falling apart, and maybe I should have. But what I actually felt, when I had the confirmation in front of me, was something closer to clarity. Like a fog I hadn't known was there had suddenly lifted. Everything snapped into focus. The timeline, the conversations, my father's evasiveness, my mother's careful way of changing certain subjects. It all made sense now. And there is something almost restful about a thing finally making sense, even when the sense it makes is terrible. I did not confront anyone immediately. This is the part that, in retrospect, I think was the right call, even though it was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I spent about 3 weeks getting my affairs in order. I talked to a lawyer, not about the marriage yet, about the business. I needed to understand exactly what my rights were, what the current shareholder structure said, and what options I had. What I found out was that the revised agreement I had seen in that folder had not yet been formally executed. It was still a draft. My current agreement still gave me significant standing. My lawyer was very clear. If I moved carefully, I had leverage. If I moved emotionally and early, I would lose it. So I waited. And while I waited, I watched my father host a 4th of July barbecue at his house. The same one we'd had every year for as long as I could remember. And I watched my brother stand at the grill with my wife standing next to him, and I watched my parents move around them both like they were the couple. Like this was just how things were now. Like the 17 years Sandra and I had built together were already just a footnote. My mother came and stood beside me at one point. She looked at them, then looked at me, and I genuinely thought, she was about to say something real. Instead, she said, "I hope you're not going to make this ugly." That's what she said. Not "I'm sorry." Not "this isn't right." She said she hoped I wasn't going to make it ugly. I looked at her for a long moment. I said, "I'm not going to make anything." I left that barbecue early. I drove around for about an hour. Then I went home, called my lawyer, and told him I was ready to move. What happened over the following 6 weeks is the part I can only describe as quiet devastation, delivered in business hours language. My lawyer contacted the company's counsel. We put my father on notice that any attempt to restructure the shareholder agreement without my consent and without fair market compensation would be met with litigation. We were not bluffing. We had documentation going back years. My contributions, my contracts, my client relationships, performance records. Everything I had built was on paper. I had always been thorough, even when I didn't know why. My father called me. It was the first time we had spoken since the barbecue. He was angry in a way I hadn't heard from him in years. A controlled anger that he used when he felt his authority was being questioned. He told me I was being disloyal. He told me I was tearing the family apart. He told me that Derek needed this, that Derek had struggled his whole life and that this was his chance. I let him finish. Then I said, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this because I'm angry. I'm doing this because I'm angry. I'm doing this because it's mine. He didn't have an answer for that. My mother called the next day. She went a different direction. She was softer, more careful, the way she was when she was trying to manage an outcome. She told me Sandra still cared about me. She told me Derek hadn't meant for things to go this far. She said families go through hard times and what mattered was coming out the other side together. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to my mother advocate for the people who had, between them, taken about 2 decades worth of my trust and used it as raw material for their own arrangements. And I thought about all the Sunday dinners, and all the holidays, and all the times I had shown up and been exactly what this family needed me to be. And I said, Mom, I have to go, and I hung up. I filed for divorce. I want to say that part plainly, without a lot of drama around it, because in a strange way, it was the least complicated piece of this. The marriage had been over for a long time. I just hadn't been informed. The process was not pleasant, but it was clean. Sandra did not fight me on anything significant. I think she had expected something messier, and when she didn't get it, she didn't know quite what to do with that. Derek, notably, was not present for any of the legal proceedings. He had a way of being absent when things got formal. The business took longer. There were several months of back and forth, offers and counter-offers, my father's lawyer and my lawyer exchanging letters in the careful language of people who are very aware that something is going to end and are trying to control how it ends. I will not go into every detail except to say that what I ultimately received was not everything I deserved, but was significantly more than what my father had originally intended to give me. My lawyer was good, I was patient. Those two things together turned out to be enough. I tendered my resignation on a Tuesday morning. I dropped off my key card, cleared the personal items from my office, and walked out through the lobby. The lobby Derek had wanted repainted. The lobby that had been repainted. A color Sandra had actually suggested. And I got in my car and I drove away from 12 years of my life. And I felt, if I'm being honest, mostly just tired. Not sad. Not angry. Tired in the way you get when you've been carrying something heavy for a very long time and you've finally been able to set it down. That was about 8 months ago. Here is what I know now from a distance. My brother and Sandra are together. They are living in the house I helped pay for before Sandra and I found our own place, which is something I find more ironic than painful at this point. Derek is now officially running the company. The vice president title became president somewhere in the shuffle, with my father stepping back more. I've heard from someone who still works there that it has not been a smooth transition. Several of the client relationships I had built over the years have become strained. One significant contract that I had managed personally was not renewed. I did not cause any of that. I simply left, and apparently some of what I had been holding together required me to be there to hold it. My parents have called 3 times since I left. Not 3 times total. 3 rounds of calls, each one spaced out a few months, each one with a slightly different version of the same message. Something about family. Something about time healing things. Something about how they hope we can find a way forward. I have listened to the voicemails. I have not returned them. I have thought carefully about whether that makes me cold or whether it makes me sane, and I have landed on the side of sane. I want to say something to anyone who's listening to this and recognizing something in it. Not the specific details, but the shape of it. The feeling of building something and having the people closest to you quietly deciding it belongs to someone else. The particular exhaustion of being the one who keeps showing up, keeps performing, keeps being exactly what the situation needs, while somewhere behind the scenes a different story is being written about you and for you, and without you. Here's what I wish someone had told me earlier. The loyalty you extend to people who are not extending it back is not virtue. It's a transaction where only one side is paying. You can call it love, you can call it family, you can call it duty. But if you are the only one honoring the contract, then there is no contract. There is just you, holding up your end of something that stopped being a two-way arrangement a long time ago. I have an apartment now. It's smaller than the house Sandra and I had, and I find that I don't mind that at all. I have a consulting arrangement with 2 companies that reached out to me after I left, clients from my old firm, as it happens, who had my personal contact information and used it. I work reasonable hours. I have coffee in the morning without thinking about who I need to manage today or what conversation I need to prepare for. My doctor says my blood pressure is the best it's been in 15 years. I did not get everything I built. I got enough. And then I got something that turns out to be worth more than I had accounted for, which is the simple ability to sit in a room without bracing for something. The last thing Derek ever said to me, the last time we were in the same physical space, was at my father's house during one of the early stages of the business negotiation. He pulled me aside in the hallway and he said, "You're making this harder than it has to be." He said it the way he said most things, relaxed, slightly amused, like the situation was a mild inconvenience to him. I looked at my brother, this person I had trained and vouched for and defended in rooms he was never in, and I said, "I know." And then I walked out of my father's house, and I have not been back since. I am not waiting for an apology. I am not holding a door open for a reconciliation that would require me to pretend that none of this happened or to be grateful for whatever version of forgiveness they eventually decide to extend. I know what I built. I know what it was worth. I know who I was in this story. That's enough for me. That's more than enough.